This week we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety in horses, but this is anxiety under saddle, especially why it happens and what you can actually do about it. Hello, welcome to Mark Langley's Horsemanship Podcast, a podcast helping people to understand their horses better, to provide solutions in a calm, connected way. I'm Jenny Langley.
And I'm Mark Langley.
Mark, you deal with horses that are anxious a lot, and you help with horses changing to be able to cope with their anxiety. That's one of your specialities. I'm sure people who own horses are all familiar about an anxious horse. But I also want to sort of dive straight into the nuts of this and go into a little bit of detail to help people who want to hear more about the strategies behind it. I've got a question that's come through from Tyler from Canada. And he goes trail riding a lot with his horses. And he's noticed that if you can, sometimes when the anxiety gets high, you can actually get off them, you can lead them for a bit. And he's noticed that some horses become very steady immediately and they can change to quite a quiet horse. So it can settle things down, perhaps especially on the way home. He's wondering if you've seen this, and if you have, why do you think it makes a difference to the horse if you're on its back or on the ground in terms of this anxiety? Why would it be that when you come off a horse, the anxiety appears? Can you just shed some light on that one for us to begin with, please?
Yeah, well, there's, I guess, two main reasons, and they both can, and a horse can have both these reasons. So if they have both these reasons, it's even harder than if a horse just has one of the reasons. So the first reason that horses can struggle a little more under saddle versus on the ground is there's still areas of anxiety about having us behind their eyes and things like that. So that's all stuff you work on in the, just the educational starting process. And even older horses I get at clinics, they're still kind of wary of someone down one of their particular eyes, especially at the back of their eye. So of course that anything you're doing in regards guiding them from behind them is going to take a lot of confidence off them, because it takes enough of their it's hard enough for them to process what's going on behind them, let alone what's going on in front of them. So it's kind of an overstimulus. So they get quite anxious. So that particular thing is more, as I said, it's a nervousness. There's unfinished handling educational things that we have to do behind their eyes and work out if there's any spots where they kind of feel a bit uncomfortable with us on one eye or the other eye, things like that. And the other issue is the horses. Some horses are better at handing a problem over, so they'd rather follow another horse, or it's very scary out there, I might just just follow you guys, and you guys can take the weight of all the new environment and sort of handle that. And some horses are better followers than they are going out and processing that new environment like a more confident horse would. So it's natural for them to want to go, okay, well, since you've got off, well, you don't mind sort of leading me through there, and I'm a lot more relaxed because you're taking a lot of that sort of responsibility of processing the environment, and I'll just tuck in and follow you. Thanks, mate. So that's the two reasons why horses will lose confidence and usually feel more confident when we get on the ground. Okay. I guess in the first situation of the unfinished business that we have to work on, the things that we can control, our legs, how confident our horse is behind us, with us behind them, is really essential. I've got a horse at home that, I started and I just haven't had time to do anything with him. And then I rode him one time and I'm like, geez, he's really tight on that right rein. And it, just the tension in his back and the way he was sort of moving his head showed me that he's really still struggling on his right side. So in the long reins, I sort of moved him around and worked behind him and got him searching and thinking so he could swap eyes and things like that. And 2 days of that long reining, I got back on him again. And then all of a sudden, when that worry down that right side disappeared, he's really more comfortable. He was better on the turns. He searched out better and stuff like that, because he was just really tense having me behind him, because he it's been a long time between rides, I suppose, and he was only really just started and had a little bit of work. So that area there, if I expected him to go out into the back of beyond, then he's still processing me and all the new scary things in front of him. So it's too much of an overload. So they'd be very happy for us to get off and lead him if that was the case. So long reining, just finding areas of where they're trying to put you in a different position, or they're not comfortable. And then the other thing is, when you squeeze your horse with your legs, is it very comfortable with that? Can it move forward? And is it very comfortable with your legs? Is it very comfortable when you saddle it? I see a lot of horses that get nervous and they feel much better when a person gets on them, because when they girth them up, the horse is tense when they girth them. There's areas on their body back behind their eyes that the person touches them and they're still a bit tense, and they've got to carry all that saddle in person. And so I go through belly roping and look at the saddling and look at when I'm stepping up on the horse and look at all those areas if the horse is increasing in anxiety to those little things. So basically, if there's any areas that you can see from when you first catch your horse and walk down its side to brushing it, to saddling it, to girthing it, to getting on it, to squeezing it, that you find any anxiety and trouble and worry in your horse, then basically they're still processing and not understanding and nervous the things that you're doing back there. So that when that gets fixed, then they got much more room to process the environment in front of them when you're riding. So the other thing, going to the second reason why horses struggle outside, they'd rather hand it over to a more confident horse. Those horses, they benefit even in the groundwork from a lot of guiding out front, searching and things like that. And those horses need a little bit more time to process things. And, you slow down. You might be riding them at your processing speed outside, but they've got to go a little slower. They might have to approach and retreat obstacles or new environments. And it takes them a lot longer sometimes compared to another horse to get confident at processing the new environment and being a leader. So as I said, those particular horses, as soon as you get off and they hand it over to you, they're going to relax. So, but if you have a horse that suffers from both those things, then they're really going to overload and not cope with being very confident under saddle outside, because you're trying to ask them to be a leader, and then they've still got problems with you on their back. So, yeah, with the horses that don't lead out very well, that's why I do a lot of riding with reins without legs, because I'm teaching them to search and without legs, I can't push them forward. And then when they're really good at searching and thinking and processing and, looking at the things they're a bit scared of and trying to understand them, opposed to sort of seeing something scary and going, where's my mates? Okay. And it's very clear when you look at horses, there's some horses that see a scary thing, and then as soon as they're a little bit nervous about something that happened, they're looking for safety with another horse. And very quickly those horses are the ones that like handing over responsibility. So they're take a bit more longer to get them to search and lead out properly with their thoughts on trail.
So you've really got to diagnose where this anxiety is coming from then. So if you go out on trail and you notice that your horse is getting anxious, instead of trying to address what's happening out on trail, you've actually got to go right back to the first stage of when you're doing groundwork with it, so that you can assess what the trigger for the anxiety is. Is that right?
Yep. It's just a classic case of anxiety stacking, and sometimes we can be a little bit unawares of where the anxiety started to stack, and by the time the horse goes out, it's already 3 parts full of anxiety because of all the little areas that we haven't addressed back in the yards and things like that. And for horses naturally not that confident, they don't have enough room to process everything else when they've already got that anxiety from all the little pieces that we missed.
And to diagnose it, the complexities of what's happening once they're outside would be huge. There could be all sorts of different anxieties affecting them. As you said, and stacking. So I suppose that's another reason for assessing it at home on the ground, because it's much easier for you to pinpoint one particular area, work on that. Maybe there'll be more, but at least it helps you to really pinpoint something to work on. Yeah.
And just, I guess, quickly to make people, I try and get them to feel how a horse feels in a situation. As if anyone's been a bit nervous and they have a sort of a technical job that they have to do, or they've got to really focus in city traffic, and it's really scary because they come from the country and they only see one car every time they drive to the shops, which is 300 kilometres away. So seeing hundreds of cars and don't know where to go. And then you got the backseat driver saying, slow down, there's a red light, there's a left up, come out, stop, woo, 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 there's another car. They're just going to be fried. The backseat driver's got to almost shut up and just let that person start to figure it out themselves and learn their way through the city traffic. And that's what happens to a horse. A horse without a rider on has nothing sort of guiding it. So sometimes it can process the environment itself, knowing that if something jumped out, it could run away whenever it wanted to. With a person on it, it's so restricted and feels that it can't make the decisions it needs to do. So then that's what makes them a little bit frantic when they go out, because they feel that they're kind of a little bit emotionally hobbled by the person that constantly guides them. So they're more of a trapping kind of possessive rider and kind of controlling rider you are, sometimes you can actually overload that horse and make it not feel free enough to step away or do something that it may need to do if something came out that it needed to move away from.
Yeah, that makes so much sense when you sort of put it in those terms. That's great. Okay, so moving on then to help someone in this actual position, let's work out some techniques that they can do. This is a question that's come through from Yvonne. She's got a 10-year-old standardbred gelding, 16.1 hands high. She's had him for 6 years, and she hasn't put a huge amount of work into him, but she's finding that at home he's absolutely perfect for her. But when they go on a trail ride, his anxiety goes into overload, especially when there's other horses in front of him. He'll jig jog, he has been known to rear, and he carries on. So it makes the riding not the pleasant experience that she'd like. And she's wanting to know what she can do to help his fear of being left behind. It's not necessarily a fear of being left behind, is it?
Well, it's a funny one. What's the context in what's his life been like? Has he been a racehorse? Things like that. Basically, by the sounds of it, there's different reasons why horses really get overloaded with other horses. Sounds like he's a horse that maybe doesn't have that confidence to, think for himself, process. So he's kind of happy being guided by the herd person in a safe environment because there's nothing to think about. So, maybe he's one of those horses that we haven't sort of got him to solve enough different problems at home. Some horses just rely on being connected to the rider and focusing on the rider and listening to them and only just having to think about where they're going, but not having to process any problems or new things or obstacles and stuff like that. So, a lot of horses, we need to somehow figure out how we can stimulate them at home. So there's scary things that they have to process. There's, they're alive and alert when we ride them at home. They're not just dull and just going through the motions, because most horses that blow up out tend to be a little bit dull at home, a little lethargic, and that's why they are. Oh, my horse is so quiet at home. It's just like he's just lazy. And it's like, well, he's not lazy. He's lethargic, and lethargic is dull, and dull is shutting, in some form shutting out and just not processing anything. So actually, when he gets into a situation where he's out, it's just an emotional overload. And I see that all the time, that horses are. And it's not just the other horses. It could be just being out on his own, in a completely new environment. So problem solving to me is the key to softness in horses. And sometimes, as I say, they just rely on us at home. You see horses that do groundwork with their owners, and they're just looking at the owner, connected to the owner, and just not thinking through problems. So that's something you might have to address a little bit faster, speed up, slow down, try and be a little bit more like bring his energy up, and even see if you can, see what happens when you go from a standstill to a canter to a gallop at home. And can he gallop up at home? Can he come back at home? All those things. And a lot of horses that we take out, they haven't even been full gallop at home, let alone, then they go out in a trail ride and they've got all this, adrenaline running through their veins from overstimulus, things like that. The other thing that blows up horses on trail is, some horses are so sensitive, and some are at the bottom of the pecking order or have been at the bottom of the pecking order. And when there's all these different horses around, the energy of all the horses just absolutely fries them. You can imagine a person that's been bullied all their life and suddenly they just get thrown into a rugby match. It'd be really a scary experience for them. So basically that can really blow horses' tops when we do that. What I'm thinking also is maybe he just wants to be stuck to the horses too. So if he's actually frightened, the other opposite thing is, he's either scared of all the horses or he needs them for confidence. So then he's like going, oh, they're going to lead. I've got to be with the horses. Otherwise I'm going to be left behind, and things like that. And that is more of, the things, how do you fix that? Well, you guide him a lot more. You at home, as I say, you do what I said before, you get him following the field, nice, waking up, problem solving. And then when you go on rides, only go with a couple of friends, just a few horses, and just start to sort of, work together as a team and ride off away from each other for a few meters and come back together again, and never always go in one direction. Just sort of, always stays a bit of like a swarm, but just moving past each other and just being completely, I guess, separate from the other horses, but knowing that the other horses aren't very far away. And I think I just did a lesson at the last clinic where I got everybody just to sort of mingle around, ride through each other a little bit, go in different directions, but then generally move as I said, a swarm in a general direction. And then they'd ride away from each other and come back to each other, and everyone would stop and everyone would go again, and then they'd stop, and then they'd stop further apart. And over the time, one horse was standing over there, one was standing over there, and they were, and I think you can sort of find a few friends that you're not just tipping him into this trail ride where everyone's just going in the general direction. You might have to go out and just expose him to riding with other horses and just tuning into you. But the people that you're riding with are all kind of helping each other a little bit until he gets a bit more exposure. And like we can't just throw him into the war zone and go, you'll be right, mate, because it can be too much for them.
Okay, so that's quite a lot of helpful training things that you can implement, Yvonne. And a lot of those are on the ground, I noticed, Mark, but then you've got these exercises you can do out on trail. So trail riding becomes more of a purpose to it rather than let's just go from point A to point B, just to set them up. Yeah. And these sort of like anxiety on the trail, it's fixable, right? I mean, what sort of time frame are we looking at? If she was to really dedicate her trail rides to solving this, how quickly would you reckon she could get on top of it and have a horse that is less anxious?
Depends on her ability, and it depends on her ability to read the horse, and it depends on, there's too many elements to sort of say how long. Everyone's got to work with their own skill set and awareness of their horses, and as that develops and gets better, you can sort of start to speed things up. But when a horse really truly understands the reins and the legs and they're confident with us, that could take months. Could take some people maybe 4 months to get a horse to steer and lead off the rein nicely and move off the leg nicely, and it could take another 2 months teaching the horse to travel to the trail ride softly in a float, so it's not traumatized on the way there, so you're not anxiety stacking on the way there.
Another point. Yeah.
There's so many elements that could set that horse up for blowing up on a trail ride that you've got to sort of look at every element. Like I said before, about, horse losing confidence when we, from when we're on the ground to when we're under the saddle, they lose confidence and then we get on off them and they feel confident. There's so many elements in there, but I really look at how the horse responds to what we can control, our legs, our reins, how they feel about that, how they feel carrying us, before I even think about how they cope with other horses. Then I look at how they are in a herd, if they're at the bottom of the pecking order, if they're very sensitive around other horses, things like that. How, if they just rely on a horse to make better decisions for them and they don't make many decisions, you can look at that. But I've seen horses at the clinic, like just the last clinic, that we worked on reins for the clinic. It was a 4-day clinic. 2 of the days were Baltic and we were outdoor, so it was wind and sideways rain. But we worked tirelessly through all that hard weather, bad weather, and got the horses softer in the worst possible situation. And, the horses are okay with things, people are scared in the wind, and it's like, well, these horses all got soft in the wind and the rain and they sort of really coped well. And then on the last day we did an exercise out in the paddock and they all got better. But, we were working on understanding the person, being a lot softer, being a lot more aware and awake, all those sorts of things. Some horses had to come down a bit and be a little calmer. Some horses had to wake up a little bit. But they all started to go better when they went out on their little ride out in the bigger paddock. So, it can be achievable in a small amount of time. Some horses it might be a big task.
Yeah, and I guess that's what comes back to addressing the right area is what's going to get you the greatest gains. So I hope that helps to anyone out there who's trail riding and has anxious horses. Just if this sort of interests you, the next couple of podcasts that are coming up are all going to be problem solving based. So these sorts of issues are going to be nutted out. Not so much trail riding, but all sorts. So hopefully you can catch us then, but we'll be back with those next week. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Mark Langley's Horsemanship Podcast. This episode is one of hundreds more. So if you are interested in learning all about how Mark trains and changes horses' mindsets, and yes, he really does do that, so that they are more open and willing, listen to another. They are packed with practical insights that everyone can use.